I'm part of a group built around outdoor adventures like hiking, snowboarding, mountain climbing, and similar activities. It originally started as a Facebook group, but eventually turned into a tight circle of about 10 people. Of course, not everyone can make every trip. At one point, we planned a weekend in Adirondack Park to tackle one of the many mountain trails. For that particular outing, it was just 4 of us: DeVito, James, Christina, and me. We packed sleeping bags and brought along 2 tents. Since James and I were the only guys on that trip, we took on the extra weight and carried the tents in our packs. We chose to go in October because we wanted to see the fall foliage at its peak. The weather during the day was incredible, cool but comfortable. Still, once evening started creeping in, we had to stop hiking and set up camp before it became too dark to do even that safely. We found a flat stretch of rocky ground and pitched the tents. 3 of us gathered wood while James poured lighter fluid over the pile of sticks to get a fire going. Soon we were sitting around the flames, eating the food we had brought and sharing stories about past trips we had taken together. That was when we heard it for the first time. A scream in the distance. A woman's scream. It sounded like someone was in real danger, like they were being attacked or terrified for their life. The sound echoed down the mountain. The 4 of us went completely silent and stared at one another. Anyone who had food in their mouth stopped chewing. For several long seconds, no one moved. The scream did not come again. Finally, we broke the silence and started asking each other what we should do. We were supposed to be alone that deep into the trail. Then another noise cut through the quiet. This one was a sharp popping sound. It did not resemble a gunshot, but the closest description we could come up with was a loud, high-pitched single pop. That was enough for us to agree to put the fire out and retreat into our tents. We had no idea who else might be out there or what was happening, and we did not want to draw attention to ourselves. James and I shared one tent, while Christina and DeVito shared the other. I have never been good at falling asleep in a sleeping bag. Add in the memory of a blood-chilling scream somewhere nearby, and it became nearly impossible. An hour or 2 passed. James had managed to drift off, but I was still tossing and turning, wide awake. Then I heard it again, another woman's scream. This one was higher pitched and much closer. I shot upright and looked at James, who was clearly awake now too. We were too afraid to even unzip the tent, because the scream had sounded almost like it came from just outside our campsite. We whispered about whether we should wake the girls, pack everything up, and start hiking back down. That would mean navigating a long trail in complete darkness. Before we could decide, we heard footsteps outside, the sound of shoes striking the rocky ground. I called out DeVito and Christina's names, assuming it had to be them. There was no response. The footsteps stopped directly outside our tent. I locked eyes with James, and we both had the same look of pure fear. Suddenly, someone began shaking our tent hard. James and I started yelling, and we could hear the girls screaming in their tent in response to us. I told James that on the count of 3, we would burst out and confront whoever was out there. I started counting out loud. On 2, the shaking stopped. By the time I reached 3, I had already unzipped the tent. We scrambled out, expecting someone to be standing there. No one was there. Whoever had been outside had vanished into the darkness. It felt like they were still out there watching us. We ran straight to the girls' tent, shouting that we needed to leave immediately. They crawled out with their backpacks ready and followed us. Seeing that they had their bags made us run back to grab ours too, even though staying any longer felt incredibly dangerous. We left the tents and sleeping bags behind and started down the mountain. Somehow we managed to navigate in the dark without using flashlights, relying only on the moonlight to guide us. We had to stop several times to catch our breath, but we refused to rest for long. None of us were willing to sleep out there again. We were convinced someone might be following us, so we just kept moving for hours until we finally reached the car. James drove about 20 minutes down the road before pulling over, and that was where we finally slept, cramped inside the vehicle. When we woke up, it was past noon. We had been completely exhausted from the long hike and the fear that kept us awake. The next day, on the drive home, we told the rest of our group everything that had happened. As far as we know, there were never any news reports about murders or strange incidents in the Adirondacks around that time. This all happened in October 2017, in case anyone ever feels like looking into it. To this day, it remains the scariest and worst night of my life. My uncle has always had a reputation in our family as the fearless one, the guy who lives for risk and constantly gives my mom, my other uncles, and especially my grandmother, something to worry about. That concern is even greater because he has been on several medications for decades. He is the definition of an adrenaline junkie. Over the course of his life, he has climbed more than 5 major mountains, with Mount Everest being the most famous attempt. He did not actually reach the summit, but he came close. After that Everest expedition, something about him shifted. His personality, once always on edge in an exciting way, changed in a way that was harder to explain. I was only 10 years old when he went on that climb. Yet even at that age, I noticed he was different when he came home. It was not until 5 years later that I learned what had really happened up there. He chose to go on the expedition alone, which in hindsight may have been his biggest mistake. He told me he stayed at base camp for a full day to adjust before pushing higher. At first, the climb felt manageable, but as anyone would expect, it became more grueling the farther he went. Even though it is common knowledge that many bodies of climbers who failed to survive are still on the mountain, he said he never truly believed he would come across one himself. Eventually, he reached the death zone, the section of the mountain above, about 8,000 meters, where oxygen levels are dangerously low. Most of the more than 200 people who have died on Everest lost their lives there. Climbers are warned not to remain in that zone longer than 16 to 20 hours, because the human body simply cannot function properly for long at that altitude. While moving through that area, my uncle saw his first body. It was wedged in a ravine. For someone who is normally upbeat and full of energy, the sight was deeply unsettling. He described the sudden shift in his mindset as going from feeling invincible and alive to suddenly feeling fragile and painfully aware of his mortality. Even so, he kept going. When exhaustion hit, he stopped and sat down to rest. The image of the corpse lingered in his mind. At the same time, he began feeling dizzy and lightheaded, most likely from the altitude and lack of oxygen. He said he felt drained and strangely reluctant to stand back up. He started talking to himself without really realizing it. After about an hour, he forced himself to his feet and admitted to himself that he did not have the strength to continue toward the summit. He decided to turn back and head down. Not long after, another climber brushed past him and encouraged him to keep going, telling him to come on and follow. The man moved upward, toward the direction my uncle had just left. My uncle told him he was done and planned to return to base camp. He said the man's voice sounded odd, almost echoing and unreal, as he urged him to keep climbing. My uncle wished him well and continued downward, his head spinning and his breathing shallow. Every time he glanced back up the mountain, the man appeared to be behind him, smiling and motioning for him to return. At first, my uncle tried to smile back and ignore him, thinking that would end the interaction. But when the man kept appearing behind him, my uncle finally stopped and firmly said he was not feeling well and needed to get back to base camp. The man, standing slightly above him on the slope, smiled again and said, "Watch me go over the ledge." Then he stepped to the edge of the snow and jumped. My uncle said the figure vanished over the side. That moment snapped him out of the haze he had been in. He rushed to the edge and looked down, expecting to see someone sliding or tumbling. There was nothing. No body, no tracks in the snow, not even the sound of someone falling. That sight terrified him enough to push him into survival mode. He hurried down the mountain as fast as he could. The next thing he remembers is everything going dark. He later woke up in a bed at the base camp medical clinic. He had collapsed, and a couple of climbers found him and helped get him low enough on the mountain for a rescue helicopter to reach him. He only told me at the very end of this story that he had stopped taking his medication for the entire trip. Combined with the extreme altitude and lack of oxygen in the death zone, he began hallucinating and talking to himself. When he returned home, he researched recent fatalities on Everest and discovered that a young climber had died on the mountain that same week. According to him, the man in the photo looked exactly like the person he had seen. That discovery made him question whether what he experienced was truly just a hallucination. Still, the death had been reported before my uncle claimed to have seen the figure. To this day, he says he is not completely certain what he witnessed. I do not push him for more details. Like I said, the experience changed him, and it clearly left a deep psychological mark. I cannot begin to imagine how terrifying that ordeal must have been for him. I once drove up to Banff National Park in Canada for a full day of hiking and climbing. The park has countless climbing routes, and it has always been a beautiful escape from the city where I can clear my head. At the time, I had just gone through a breakup and needed something intense to distract me. Getting out into the mountains felt like the best possible remedy. I packed all the gear I would need into my climbing bag: rope, helmet, harness, quick draws, and every other piece of equipment I could fit. After hiking about half a mile through the forest, I found a rock face that looked perfect to scale. I located a sturdy tree at the top that could serve as an anchor and wrapped my rope securely around it. You might wonder why I began from the top instead of the bottom. Normally, on established routes, there are bolts already drilled into the rock where you can clip your carabiner and then attach a rope. As you climb, you secure yourself to additional bolts along the way. But since I was creating my own route that day, I had to anchor myself from above, which is called top roping, and lower myself down to place the bolts manually. Once I finished setting everything, I would end up at the base and be able to climb back up along the path I had created. After double-checking my setup, I began lowering myself down the rock face and placing bolts as I descended. Skipping most of the technical details, I eventually came across something unexpected. There was a cave carved directly into the rock face. It was a large opening in the mountain wall, and it immediately struck me as unusual because most caves begin at ground level. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to climb inside. I had enough rope to move in without disconnecting from my anchor. I sat at the edge of the opening and looked into the darkness. Just a short distance from the entrance, it became completely black. I wondered how far the cave extended and whether it might open up somewhere else on the mountain. That was when I noticed a faint buzzing sound coming from deeper inside. It was a very low tone, almost easy to miss if you were not paying attention. I stepped carefully farther in, and as the humming grew slightly louder, I called out hello into the cave. I was not expecting anyone to answer, and I certainly did not want a response. I only wanted to hear how the echo carried so I could judge the size of the space. The echo came back strong and clear, but the moment my voice faded, the buzzing stopped. That sent a chill through me. I was unsettled, but my curiosity was still stronger than my fear. I took a few more steps inward, noticing my rope beginning to catch slightly at the top of the entrance. Then I heard something else. Slow, heavy breathing. In that instant, I knew I was not alone in the cave. I thought maybe it was an animal taking shelter inside. I began backing toward the entrance as quietly as I could. When I felt close enough to the opening, I reached into my backpack and pulled out my flashlight. I pointed it toward the darkness, my finger hovering over the switch for several seconds. Against my better judgment, but driven by curiosity, I turned it on. The beam cut through the dark and lit up part of the cave. At first, it looked empty. Then I saw them. Two heads were peeking at me from behind a curved section of the cave wall. I could only see part of their faces, but what I saw looked pale and unhealthy. Their expressions were fixed on me in a way that made my stomach drop. They had been standing in total darkness moments earlier. I could not see them, yet they had clearly been able to see me standing near the light of the entrance. I shut off the flashlight immediately and bolted for the exit. As I started climbing back up the rock face, I suddenly felt something grab my ankle, trying to yank me backward into the cave. I kicked as hard as I could and felt my shoe connect with someone's face. The grip released instantly, and I heard a piercing shriek of pain. The sound did not even seem fully human. It was more like something feral, like a creature that had lived in that cave for years. I did not look down. I climbed faster than I ever had before. As far as I know, neither of those barely human figures tried to follow me out. Fueled by adrenaline, I reached the top in record time. I chose not to lower myself calmly back down on the rope because I was terrified they might grab it and pull me back toward them. At the top of the rock face, I carved 2 large X marks, and then I added 2 more at the base once I returned there, hoping to warn anyone who might pass through not to climb that route. I hiked all the way back to the roadside where I had parked my car. The drive home felt long and surreal. I kept replaying everything in my mind, grateful to be alive and shaken by what I had seen. What were those people doing inside that cave? And what would they have done if they had managed to drag me back inside? Their skin looked pale and sickly. They did not seem like normal people at all. When I finally had cell service, I called the park warden and gave them the coordinates of the cave, explaining that there were dangerous, unhealthy-looking individuals hiding inside. One thing is certain. For a while at least, that experience completely erased any thoughts about my breakup.